The stories are going to be a little morbid and maybe a little disturbing for some people if they don't know who Edgar Allan Poe is. So just make sure you're okay with morbid and disturbing, and look up Edgar Allan Poe if you're not sure of who they are. So yes, I'm so excited for this. My name is Lady Amy. I'm a parlor host who absolutely loves books, psychology, philosophy, and really good warm tea. I'm a founding streamer on Irium, and I also conduct streamer interviews on Twitch because I love talking to people. People have such fascinating brains, so I love that. And I really, really love the absolute wonderful people that pass through my parlor. And I'm so glad I can host you this evening in the midnight hours. It's going to be wonderful. So after the last story, we will have a chance to chat about your favorite stories that I read. So if you have questions or thoughts or ideas, feel free to just save those either on your phone and then we can chat about them afterwards. And also, I don't expect you to constantly look at me. It's 12:30 a.m., right? So feel free to get cozy, doodle, relax, and I'm just going to read you through some of Poe's works. And I want to tell you some things about Edgar Allan Poe before we get started. So he was born on January 19, 1809, and died around 40, so he's quite young. So we're not sure how he passed. And he's one of the founders of modern psychological horror and modern detective stories, which is really cool. And he really was very emotional in his storytelling, and the poem The Raven made him famous. But he actually didn't earn very much money from it, which I thought was really sad. His style helped invent our modern psychological horror, right? So he kind of shifted horror from the monsters of the outside world into the monsters of our own mind, which is making fear kind of this intimate and internal and kind of very close thing, which was really, really cool. So yeah, I'm really excited about these stories. He kind of popularized Gothic aesthetics in American culture, and he kind of writes about what it feels like to lose control kind of very quietly. So I really like these stories. So the first one we're going to start with is The Telltale Heart. It is about 12 to 15 minutes, and it's kind of very much psychological horror and unreliable narration. And it's about this guy who insists he's sane while being kind of destroyed. So it's going to be a really fun ride. I hope you like it. Okay, here we go. The Telltale Heart. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why would you say that I'm mad? This disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. All above was the sense of hearing acute. I hear all the things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered into my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold, I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point you fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, and with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening of the door so far that I could see him as he lay on his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye, and this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just as midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and it was so impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he passed the night. So you see, he would have been very profound old man indeed, to suspect that every night just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. Perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was black as pitch with a thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the openings of the door, and I kept pushing on it steadily and steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang in bed, crying, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or relief. No, it was the low stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight when the world slept, it had welled up in my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him. Though I chuckled at heart, I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy the causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It's nothing but the wind in the chimney. It's only a mouse crossing the floor." Or, "It's merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain because death, in approaching him, had stalked him with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern, and so I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a dim ray like the thread of a spider shot from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else on the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if instinct precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense? Now I say that came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum simulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder in every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now the dead hour of the night amidst the dreadful silence of the old house. So strange a noise as this excites me to this uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and I stood still. But the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart might burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. That sound would have been heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned. I worked hastily but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so carefully, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could detect anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out. No stain, no blood spot. I had been too weary of that. A tub had caught all. And when I had made an end to these labors, it was 4 o'clock. Still as dark as midnight, and the bell sounded the hour. There came a knocking at the street door, and I went to open it with a light heart. For what did I have to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. A suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what did I have to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search, and search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was particularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them dead. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but they sat still and they still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, quick, dull sound, much like the sound a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heady strides, as if excited by fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore, and I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose all over and continuously increased. It grew louder and louder and louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard it not? Almighty God, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew, they were making a mockery of my horror. This, I thought, and this, I think, was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear these hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt I must scream or die, and now again, hark, louder. Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here is the beating of his hideous heart. That is the end of the first one, The Telltale Heart. This is such a cool one because I really love how he just devolves emotionally into this story. It's much like Dostoevsky's, I can never pronounce that, a story when he talks about the man riddled with grief and guilt after killing somebody, and really love this one. So hopefully you like that. We're at 12:47, so we're definitely going to be able to continue on. The next story is the Cask of Amontillado, and this particular story is about 15 minutes long, and it's a revenge story. And it's a revenge carried out calmly, methodically, and without remorse. So I really like this because it kind of explores resentment. It explores our egos and how we can justify being very, very cruel and still feel very morally correct. And it's quite a terrifying thing, which is really fun to explore. Of course, not in real life. In stories and literature, it's fun to explore. So we shall continue on. The Cask of Amontillado. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato that I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You who so well know the nature of my soul would not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but I must punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was with wont, to smile in his face, as he did not perceive that my smile was now at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmary, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk, one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical caps and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe for what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado, a pipe, impossible, and in the middle of the carnival?" "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain." "Amontillado!" "I have my doubts. Amontillado, and I must satisfy them. Amontillado. As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchesi. If any one has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me." Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry." "And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own." "Come, let us go." "Whither?" "To your vaults." "My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucchesi—" "I have no engagement. Come, come." "My friend, no, this is not the engagement, but the severe cold which I perceived you're afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre." "Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado, you have been imposed upon. And as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado." Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, and putting on a mask of black silk, and drawing a requilare closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them the explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I knew well, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 famblots, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together upon the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells on his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe?" he said. "It is farther on," said I, "but observe the white web-work which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned towards me and looked into my eye with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. "Nitre?" he asked at length. "Nitre," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" Cough, cough. My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many, many minutes. "It's nothing," he said at last. "Come," I said with decision, "we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchesi." "Enough," he said. "The cough's a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough." "True, true," I replied. "And indeed I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper precaution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps." Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle, which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. "Drink," I said, presenting him with the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly while his bells jingled. "I drink," he said, "to the buried that repose among us." "And I to your long life." He again took my arm, and we proceeded. "These vaults are extensive," he said. "The Montresors," I replied, "were a great and numerous family." "I forget your arms." "A huge human foot in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel." "And the motto?" Nemo me impune laceti. Good, he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. We had passed through the long walls of the piled skeletons with casks and puncheons intermingling into the most recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to siege Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. The nitre, I said. See, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it's too late. Your cough. It is nothing, he said. Let us go on. But first, another draught of the Medoc. I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with fierce life. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. He looked out in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. You do not comprehend, he said. Not I replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. How? You are not of the Masons. Yes, I said. Yes. You, impossible, a Mason. A Mason, I replied. A sign. It is this, I answered, and produced a trowel from beneath the folds of my recollier. You jest, he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. But let us proceed to the Amontillado. Be it so, I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended and passed on, and descending again. Arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains piled to the vault overhead in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th side, the bones had been thrown down and laid promiscuously among the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. When the wall thus exposed to the placing of the bones, we perceived a still interior crypt or recess in the depths about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs. In vain, Fortunato was uplifting his torch, trying to look into the depth of the recesses. Proceed, I said. Herein is the Amontillado. As for Luceschi... he's an ignoramus, interrupted my friend as he stepped unsteadily forward, and I followed immediately. I found instant he had reached the extremity of the niche and found that his progress was stopped by the rock, and he stood stupidly and somewhat bewildered. A moment more and I had hooked him to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of them depended a short chain and the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. Pass your hand, I said, over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you, but I must first render you all to the little attentions on my power. The Amontillado! Ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. True, I replied, the Amontillado. As I said these words, I busied myself among the bones which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered the quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depths of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was a long and obstinate silence. I lay the second tier and the third tier and the fourth of the bricks, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise from Fortunato lasted for several minutes, during which, and I might hearken, the more satisfaction. I ceased my labors and sat down on the bones, and at last the clanking subsided. I resumed the trowel and finished without the interruption of the fifth, sixth, and seventh layers of brick. The wall was now nearly up a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams burst suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated, I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recesses, but the thought an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of he who clamored. I re-echoed, I aided, and I yelled and screamed with all my strength. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th layer of brick. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th, and there remained but a single stone to be flittered and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its distant position, but there now came from it, the niche, a low laugh that erected the hairs from my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "Ha, ha, a very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the Plaza. Over our wine, The Amontillado," I said. "Yes, the Amontillado, but it is not getting late. Will they not be awaiting us at the Palazzo? The Lady Fortunato and the rest. Let us be gone." "Yes," I said, "let us be gone." "For the love of God, Montessor!" "Yes," I said, "for the love of God." But to these words I hearkened in vain a reply. I grew impatient. "Fortunato?" No answer. I called again. "Fortunato!" No answer still. I thrust a torch between the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so. I hastened to put an end to my labor. I forced up the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry I re-erected the old ramparts of bones. For half of a century no mortal had disturbed them in pace. And that is the end of the Cask of Amontillado. And this is a really intense story that I do love reading. I feel like it's all of his stuff is morbid, which I really love, but kind of exploring why he did it. It's not fully explored, but our main character definitely feels very, I was right in bricking up this man in the catacombs, and I am completely in the right. Now, whether or not we find out what actually happens to him, I'm not sure. I don't have that text here, but yes. We are at 1:04, so we have time for one last one. So we are going to do the Mask of the Red Death. Actually, if we want some time for chatting, we might just do the oval portrait. So the oval portrait is about 5 to 6 minutes. And then after that, if you have any comments or stories or things you want to chat about, you can feel free to chat about Edgar Allan Poe or maybe this type of prose, which I think is really cool. Okay, so I'm just going to get some water. So this one is about 5 to 6 minutes long, and it is an example of how Poe gets really obsessed with art and obsession and loss. And so it's really about creation becoming very, very destructive when obsession kind of replaces being caring about something. And it kind of resonates with our burnout culture today. So, getting burnt out, being really obsessed with a particular person or thing, and also sacrificing other people for ambition. So, it's got some really cool themes in there. And we shall end the night with this one. Really excited. I just have to open it up. Give me 1 second. Okay, here we go. The text is a little smaller on this, so you'll have to bear with me. I might be squinting a little bit. Move myself closer. Okay. Edgar Allan Poe, The Oval Portrait. The chateau in which my valet had ventured to make forcible entrance, rather than permit me in my desperately wounded condition to pass a night in the open air, which was one of those piles of commingled gloom and grandeur that have so long frowned upon the Apennines, not less in fact than the fancy of Mrs. Radcliffe. To all appearance, it had been temporarily and very lately abandoned. We established ourselves in one of the smallest and least sumptuously furnished apartments. It lay in a remote turret of the building. Its decorations were rich, yet tattered and antique. Its walls were hung with tapestry and bedecked with the manifold and multifold armorial trophies, together with the unusually great number of very spirited modern paintings and frames of rich, golden arabesque. In these paintings, which depended from the wall not only in their main surfaces, but in many nooks which the bizarre architecture of the chateau perhaps had caused me to take deep interest. So I bade Pedro to close the heavy shutters of the room, since it was already night, to light the tongues of a tall candelabra which stood by the head of my bed, and to throw open far and wide the fringed curtains of black velvet which enveloped the bed. I wished all this done, that I might resign myself, if not to sleep, at least alternatively to the contemplation of these pictures, and the perusal of a small volume which had been found upon the pillow, which had purported to criticize and describe them. Long and long I read, and devoutly I gazed upon the portraits and upon this booklet that explained them. Rapidly and gloriously the hours flew by, and the deep midnight came. The position of the candelabrum displeased me, and outreached my hand with difficulty. Rather than disturb my slumbering valet, I placed it so as to throw its rays more fully upon the book. But the action produced an effect altogether unanticipated. The rays of the numerous candles, for there were many, now fell within the niche of the room, which had hitherto been thrown into a deep shade by one of the bedposts. I saw in vivid light a picture all unnoticed before. It was the portrait of a young girl in womanhood. I glanced at the painting hurriedly, and then closed my eyes. Why I did, while my lids remained thus shut, was not first even sure to me. I ran over in my mind my reason for shutting my eyes. It was an impulsive movement to gain time for thought, to make sure that my vision had not deceived me, to calm and subdue my fancy for this painting, for most sober and sure gaze. In a very few moments I again looked fixedly at the painting. That I now saw all right, I could not and would not doubt, for the first flashing of the candle upon the canvas had seemed to dissipate the dreamy stupor which was stealing over my senses, and to startle me at once into waking light. The portrait, I have already said, was that of a womanhood. It was mere head and shoulders done in what was technically termed a vignette manner, much in the style of the favorite heads of Sully. The arms, the bosom, and the ends of the radiant hair melted imperceptibly into the vague yet deep shadow which had formed the background of the whole. The frame was oval, richly gilded and figured in Moresque, and as a thing of art, nothing could have been more admirable than the painting itself. But it could be neither the execution of the work nor the immoral beauty of the countenance, which had so suddenly and so vehemently moved me. I apologize. I just need to drink a little bit of water. Give me 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Least of all could it have been that my fancy, shaken from its half-slumber, had mistaken the head for that of a living person. I saw at once that the peculiarities of the design, of the vignetting and the frame must have instantly dispelled such an idea, must have presented even in its momentarily entertainment. Thinking earnestly about these points, I remained for an hour, perhaps, half sitting, half reclining, with my vision riveted upon this portrait. Satisfied with the true secret of the effect, I fell back upon the bed. I had found the spell of the picture in an absolutely lifelikeness of the expression, which at first it subdued and appalled me. With deep reverent awe, I replaced the candles in the former position, and the cause of my deep agitation being shut from my view, I tried to discuss the paintings and the histories with the book. Turning to the number which designated the oval portrait, I read from the book of vague and quaint words which follow. She was a maiden of the rarest beauty, and not more lovely and full of glee. And evil was the hour when she saw and loved and wedded the painter. He, passionate, studious, austere, and having already bride in his art, she a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely and full of glee, all light and smiles and frolicsome, of the woman, loving and cherishing all things, hating only the art which was her rival, dreading only the palette and brushes and other instruments that deprived her. It was a terrible thing for this lady to hear the painter speak of his desire to portray even his young bride. But she was humble and obedient, and sat meekly for many weeks in the dark high turret chamber, where the light dripped upon the pale canvas. But the painter took glory in his work, which went on from hour to hour and from day to day, and the painter was passionate and wild, moody man, and who became so lost in reveries and his painting, he would not see the light that fell on the lone place which withered the health and the spirits of his bride. She pined for him, yet she smiled on and on uncomplainingly, because she saw that the painter, of high renown, was burning with pleasure and passion in his task of painting her, and wrought day and night so to depict her who loved him so. Yet who grew daily more dispirited and weak? It was the bride. And in sooth, who beheld the portrait spoke of the resemblance of the low words, of the mighty marvel, of the proof not less of the power of the painter than his deep love for her, whom he depicted so surprisingly well. But at length, as the labor drew nearer to its conclusion, there were admitted none to the turret. No one was allowed to come in, for the painter had grown wild with the ardor of his work, and turned his eyes from the canvas rarely. Not even looking at his wife, he would not see the tints which he spread upon the canvas were drawn and taken from the cheeks of his bride, who sat behind him. And when many a weeks had passed and but little remained to do so, save one brush upon the mouth and one tint upon the eye, the spirit of the lady next to him flickered as the flame within the socket of the lamp. And then the brush was given, and then the tint was placed, and for one moment the painter stood entranced upon the perfect work in which he had created. But in the next he gazed, while yet he gazed, he grew tremulous and very pallid and aghast, and crying with a loud voice, he said, "This is indeed life itself," and he turned to regard his bride, and she was dead. Oh, that is the end of the oval portrait. It's really a story of being so obsessed with the idea of something that you lose, of course, sight of reality. But also, in a lot of cases, we lose sight of our own relationships with people and maybe our own relationship with ourselves. And I love that descent into madness read in the midnight hour, because we're quite literally here. It's 1:15 a.m. So we're quite literally here in the midnight hour. And so I think it's quite apt that we got this time slot, and it wasn't intentional on my part, but I think it's perfect. Someone who slotted us here knew exactly what they were doing. So that is the end of my readings for the night. If you have anything you want to chat about or comment on or talk about a favorite story, feel absolutely free. I'm going to spend a couple of moments chatting about my favorite moments of these and just Edgar Allan Poe in general, and then we can end for the evening. But I am really grateful for all of you coming and just listening. I do really love reading. I love books. We're doing a book club right now in some of our Irium streams, and so I love books. I love reading, and I just want to keep it alive. And I'm by no means a professional voice actor, so the reading for me is more of a passion of the heart. So I'm glad you could join me with it. Mm-hmm. My favorite, a couple of item or things for me when I think about the couple stories we read is it is really hard to express how kind of suddenly Edgar Allan Poe expresses like the death and the murder and the morbid, because he does it with such almost energy and not joy necessarily, but kind of revels in the morbidity of it all. And I find that incredibly refreshing, even in the modern time, because oftentimes it's a topic that's very, very taboo. So I really love him kind of breaking into that space and exploring it for us and exploring kind of the madness of the human mind. So